Ethan Calloway stepped off the gleaming shuttle and immediately questioned every life choice that had ever led him to interstellar diplomacy. The floor beneath him hummed with a soft vibration that tickled his socks through the thin material, and he found himself wishing he had worn thicker socks, or perhaps anti-gravity boots. The Xyarian capital was a marvel, but in that moment it felt less like awe and more like a sophisticated trap designed to make Earthlings feel inadequate. Hovercarriages zoomed past at angles that defied reason, leaving streaks of light that could double as modern art installations or accidental laser beams. Ethan squinted at one particularly enthusiastic vehicle, convinced it had waved at him. Or maybe that was just his nerves. He shuffled toward the palace, a tower of crystal spires that shimmered like a sugar-crazed dream, carrying a ceremonial box of earth chocolates that seemed trivial and absurd against the grandeur surrounding him. He had been briefed exhaustively on etiquette, protocols, and the subtle distinctions between formal bowing and interpretive lunges. Yet somehow, when it came down to the actual moment, every piece of advice scattered in his brain like a spilled bag of starberries. At the grand doors, he straightened his tie, realized it was completely unnecessary, and ignored it anyway because manners mattered, sometimes even when irrelevant. Inside, the chamber was filled with whispers and the gentle hum of crystalline walls. Courtiers' eyes tracked him with the precision of laser sensors, their elongated forms darting in and out of view as if performing some silent choreography. Ethan approached the throne, which was not so much a seat as a levitating platform framed by arcs of glowing light. His palms were sweating in a way that made him reconsider if a handshake or a head bow, or perhaps a polite combination of both, would be less catastrophic. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that humans had survived far worse things than alien protocol, like pineapple on pizza debates and reality TV finales. The Queen entered, and the room seemed to collectively inhale. She was breathtaking, pale, angular, and humanoid, but with long, curved ears that twitched in a subtle, almost mischievous rhythm. Her eyes, a liquid silver, swept the chamber in a way that made him feel simultaneously observed and oddly invited to make a mistake. Ethan bowed, tried to smile, and nearly toppled the ceremonial orb floating beside him. It pinged in protest. He froze. The sound echoed through the hall, each note sharper than a diplomat's reprimand. A hawk would have been less judgmental. His mind raced, frantically recalling every snippet of etiquette he'd memorized. No touching, no speaking until spoken to, avoid eye contact at all costs. Oh wait, eye contact is encouraged, but only moderately. His foot caught a floating cable. He stumbled, arms flailing, and managed to knock the box of chocolates into the air. The chocolates performed a spectacular zero-gravity ballet before landing on the floor with a gentle plop. Ethan could almost hear the collective gasp of the courtiers, and then silence. The Queen blinked once, her ears twitched, and then she did something entirely unexpected. She smiled. Not a sharp, thin-lipped diplomatic smile, but a soft, amused curve of her lips that suggested she might enjoy seeing humans scramble occasionally. Ethan tried to bow again, only to trip slightly, landing in a graceless heap that he silently hoped resembled a bow. I apologize," he managed, voice quivering, unsure if it sounded more like sincerity or the plea of a man negotiating with a hyper-intelligent cat. "I find your enthusiasm refreshing," the Queen said, her voice lilting, melodic, and impossibly calm. She raised a hand, and a holographic screen materialized, displaying rotating constellations and what appeared to be an animated guide on proper chocolate placement during royal audiences. Ethan, stunned, attempted to follow the guide, which insisted on holding chocolates in both hands at precise angles. He failed spectacularly, managing instead to launch a chocolate directly into the hovering orb, which ricocheted and bounced dangerously close to a courtier's elongated ear. The courtier squeaked, and Ethan bowed instinctively, whispering, "I swear this is diplomacy, not chaos." The Queen's silver eyes glimmered as she leaned forward slightly. "Your planet produces a curious form of humor," she said, long ears twitching like sensors detecting emotional frequencies. "It seems accidental, yet deliberate in its charm. Explain this tendency to stumble through ceremony." Ethan opened his mouth, intending a solemn answer about cultural differences and human adaptability, but what emerged was an awkward joke about Earth's gravity being too stubborn and fruit being too rebellious. The Queen's soft laughter rang through the hall, resonant and musical, and for a moment, Ethan felt like he had successfully navigated a joke instead of a diplomatic minefield. He spent the next several minutes trying not to trip over his own feet, accidentally tossing more chocolates, and responding to questions with nervous wit. The Queen studied him with patient, deliberate attention, her ears flicking occasionally in ways that almost resembled a nod. Ethan realized that she wasn't judging him for errors. She was observing his reactions, his honesty, and his willingness to keep trying despite humiliation. Somewhere deep in his human brain, he felt relief, mingled with a spark of curiosity. Maybe alien courts were less about punishment and more about understanding character through chaos. By the end of the audience, Ethan had accomplished something remarkable. He had survived without formal exile, delivered 2 terrible jokes, and unintentionally performed a comedic ballet with chocolates and ceremonial orbs. The Queen's final words, delivered with a hint of mirth, echoed in his mind as he left the chamber. "Perfection is tedious. Courage is far more interesting." Ethan smiled, imagining how he would recount this to his friends back on Earth, knowing they would think he was exaggerating. And perhaps he was, but only slightly. Ethan's second day in the palace began with an awkward sense of optimism, like stepping barefoot onto a trampoline. You hoped for balance but expected flailing. He shuffled into the audience chamber, clutching a datapad full of notes that were now mostly doodles of his own panicked facial expressions. The Queen was already there, seated lightly on her levitating throne, her long ears flicking as if reading invisible headlines about his previous performance. Ethan bowed hastily, managing not to trip over the ceremonial orb this time, though he did nearly step on a small, hovering creature that resembled a jellyfish made of light. "Sorry," he whispered, even though it probably didn't understand him. The Queen's silver eyes twinkled and she inclined her head. It was encouragement, or mockery. Ethan wasn't sure, and frankly, he didn't want to be sure. "Today," she began, her voice carrying a rhythm that made even the floating banners seem to sway in anticipation, "we shall explore the subtleties of interstellar negotiation, assuming one survives long enough to make a point." Ethan nodded, trying not to imagine himself surviving via sheer luck. She gestured to a nearby console, which projected holographic courtrooms and floating star maps. "You will participate in simulations." Ethan squinted at the images. "Simulations?" he asked. "Yes," the Queen said, her ears twitching like fine-tuned instruments. "Scenarios in which a human might offend, alien species might revolt, or interstellar treaties might implode, preferably all at once." Ethan swallowed. He appreciated humor in theory, but wondered if his stomach appreciated it as much. The first scenario involved a trade dispute between 2 sentient starships. Ethan was to act as the mediator. "Remember," the Queen said, "logic is optional, charm is mandatory, and accidents are inevitable. Embrace them." Ethan took a deep breath, only to have his chair emit a sudden squeal as if laughing at him. He tried to sit properly, which resulted in a small arc of sparks, and muttered, "Well, that's my charm, I suppose." The starships argued, projecting holographic images of planets they claimed as home territory. One of them insisted that Earth pizza should not be sold in their sector, citing sacrilege to the crust gods. Ethan blinked. "Sacred crust?" he asked. The Queen leaned back, her silver eyes narrowing just enough to make him feel like he'd been caught in an intergalactic sitcom. He attempted diplomacy. "Perhaps we could." He tripped over his own words and metaphorically, later over a stray hologram projection, which caused one of the starships to display a looping dance of protest, a neon jig that looked suspiciously like it was mocking him. The Queen raised an eyebrow. "Interesting method," she said. Ethan muttered something about gravity being uneven on Earth, which may or may not have been relevant. Somehow, despite the chaos, the starship settled on a compromise involving the ceremonial exchange of luminous fruit. Ethan barely understood how, but he noticed a faint smile from the Queen. He counted it as a minor victory. Next came the etiquette exercise. Ethan was to serve an alien diplomat a drink from a hovering tray. He lifted the glass carefully, forgetting for a moment that his sleeves had been retrofitted with micromagnets. The glass shot upward with a comedic ping, orbiting the chandelier before landing gently on the diplomat's head. The alien blinked, ears twitching, and said something that sounded like a polite insult. Ethan bowed. "Thank you for your patience," he said. The Queen's quiet chuckle filled the chamber, and Ethan realized he was learning more about humor than protocol. During a brief break, a servant drone buzzed near him, holding a tray of snacks that glowed with bioluminescence. Ethan poked one lightly. It rolled across the floor like a sentient jelly bean. "So, these are edible?" he asked. The Queen tilted her head. "Mostly. They are also mildly sentient. Treat them with respect." Ethan poked another just to test the rules. It blinked at him in a way that suggested judgment. "Right," he muttered. "Noted, no snack bullying." He laughed at his own inability to resist, and the Queen's soft laugh echoed back, ears flicking in a rhythm that almost made him think they were communicating like musical instruments. The final exercise involved a crisis simulation. An ambassador from Gloreth 9 had been offended by a misunderstood gesture. Ethan was tasked with repairing relations. He bowed, tripped slightly, and accidentally launched a datapad into the air. It spun slowly, projecting 3D images of exploding planets before settling into a hologram of kittens wearing space helmets. The Gloreth 9 ambassador blinked, then laughed. Ethan froze. Laughter, at a failed protocol. The Queen's ears twitched sharply and she said, "Observe, human. Intent often matters more than precision." Ethan stared, slowly absorbing the lesson, realizing that even in disaster, honesty and willingness to engage were more powerful than flawless technique. By the end of the day, Ethan was exhausted, coated in glowing fruit residue and holographic kitten projections. The Queen approached, her long ears twitching as she studied him carefully. "You are clumsy, impulsive, and occasionally terrifying," she said. "Yet you display courage in your errors, curiosity in your failures, and humor in your panic." Ethan swallowed. Praise, critique. He wasn't sure, but her expression suggested approval. "Tomorrow," she added, "we explore social rituals and the dangerous art of gift-giving. Bring a sense of humor and, if possible, anti-gravity slippers." Ethan chuckled despite the fatigue. Somehow, despite chaos, glowing fruit, and sentient snack rebellion, he was surviving, and even learning, to navigate the unpredictable, humorous, and subtle currents of Xyarian court life. Ethan awoke to the hum of the palace, which sounded like a distant chorus of singing glass. His socks were slightly singed from yesterday's minor electrical mishap with the hovering snack tray, but he counted it as a small victory. No permanent injuries. He shuffled toward the audience chamber, mindful of the floating jelly bean-like snacks that occasionally zipped past like interstellar drones with a mischievous streak. Today, the Queen had promised lessons in social rituals and the dangerous art of gift-giving, which Ethan interpreted as a polite way of saying he would probably embarrass himself spectacularly. He braced for the inevitable. The Queen was already seated, her long ears twitching in a pattern that suggested amusement, curiosity, or subtle telepathy. He wasn't sure which. She gestured for him to approach. Ethan tried to bow gracefully, tripped over the faint gravity field around the levitating throne, and ended up performing a sort of human roll that landed him upright, surprisingly intact. A new style of greeting. The Queen asked, her voice tinged with humor. Ethan muttered something about Earth martial arts, though he suspected she knew he had no training whatsoever. Indeed, she said, her ears flicking once. Improvisation is acceptable, provided it does not destroy a planet or a gift. The first task involved presenting a gift to a council of alien dignitaries. Ethan had brought a small, innocuous box containing a holographic photo frame from Earth, which he assumed was universally acceptable. He stepped forward, trying to project dignity, only to have the box slip from his hands in zero gravity, spinning wildly in the air. The holographic frame projected a loop of dancing kittens onto the chamber walls. One alien dignitary, a four-limbed being with translucent skin, blinked at it. Another, a hovering gelatinous blob, emitted a sound that Ethan assumed was amusement or critique. The Queen's soft chuckle filled the room. "It is a lively gift," she said. Ethan bowed, muttering, "I meant it sincerely," and the dignitaries responded with a mixture of blinking, buzzing, and what sounded like polite applause. Next came the test of ceremonial speech. Ethan was handed a datapad containing a transcript of interstellar greetings, none of which he could pronounce without accidentally summoning a minor sonic distortion. He tried, stuttering through syllables that twisted his tongue in ways humans were not meant to endure. One particularly difficult greeting caused the ceiling lights to flicker, and a small drone nearly crashed into his shoulder in shock. The Queen's long ears twitched sharply, but instead of scolding, she said, "Creativity in error is no-do." Orthy, continue. Ethan felt a flicker of relief and pressed on, incorporating Earth jokes about coffee and procrastination. To his astonishment, some dignitaries actually laughed, or at least made a sound he interpreted as laughter. During the mid-morning break, Ethan found himself seated near a floating tray of bioluminescent pastries. One of them drifted toward him, blinking innocently. Ethan poked it with his finger. It blinked again, then released a puff of fragrant gas that smelled like toasted marshmallows. He muttered, "Yes, yes, I respect your sentience." And the Queen's quiet laughter reminded him that humor could be diplomacy, if delivered with humility and a willingness to look foolish. The afternoon involved a negotiation exercise with an alien species famous for holding grudges over minor insults. Ethan had to apologize for an earlier faux pas, accidentally insulting their preferred method of propulsion, and offer a gesture of goodwill. He nervously extended a tray of glowing fruit. One piece floated away, orbiting him like a tiny moon, and collided with a holographic projection of their home world. The alien delegation blinked, emitted a sound halfway between indignation and amusement, and Ethan froze. The Queen's silver eyes scanned the room. "Observe, human," she said. "Chaos does not preclude diplomacy. Intent is often more persuasive than perfection." Ethan nodded vigorously, feeling as though he had just received a key to an interstellar etiquette manual written entirely in riddles and soft laughter. By evening, Ethan's brain was fried but oddly exhilarated. He stumbled toward a quiet corner of the palace, only to find the Queen following. "You handle embarrassment well," she said, her ears flicking in a pattern that suggested amusement. "Your species values humor, yes?" Ethan nodded, trying not to recall the orbiting fruit incident. "Yes, and humility and luck." The Queen's smile deepened. "Luck indeed, but also courage. You stumble, yes, but you persist. That is far more valuable than flawless execution." Ethan blinked. Somehow, amid floating fruit, dancing holograms, and bizarre etiquette tests, he understood that this was a lesson in character rather than skill. As he prepared to leave the chamber, the queen handed him a small, levitating orb. "For practice," she said. Ethan caught it clumsily, nearly tossing it into a holographic star map. "Practice of what?" he asked. "Of adaptation," she replied, her ears flicking in a rhythm that almost sounded like music. "Of humor, of grace, and of navigating unpredictability." Ethan nodded, feeling both terrified and inspired. Somehow he had survived another day in the Xyarian court, accumulated bruises to his dignity, and miraculously learned something about courage, humor, and the peculiar ways alien royalty measured character. As he left, a small bioluminescent pastry floated after him. Ethan sighed, muttering, "Not another one," and the pastry blinked as though laughing. He chuckled despite himself, realizing that in this court, even snacks had personality, and perhaps, just perhaps, he was beginning to fit in. Ethan awoke to a chorus of humming lights, the palace seemingly amused at his persistence. He rolled out of his bed, which hovered slightly above the floor and occasionally shifted in gentle arcs, making him feel like he was waking inside a softly rocking spaceship. Today's lesson, the Queen had said yesterday, would be the dangerous art of social rituals, a phrase that sounded less like instruction and more like a polite warning that he would almost certainly trip into chaos. He stuffed a pocket full of bioluminescent pastries, just in case they were needed as props, and headed toward the audience chamber, carefully avoiding the small floating jelly beans that had acquired personalities overnight. The Queen was already there, seated on her levitating throne, ears flicking in patterns Ethan had begun to interpret as a form of communication, though he remained uncertain whether she was amused, plotting, or sensing how badly he would embarrass himself today. "Good morning, human," she said, her voice smooth as liquid metal. "We begin with the formal greeting of the Drelax envoy. You will greet them according to custom." Ethan swallowed. He had memorized the greeting guide, but in zero gravity, bowing could easily become an impromptu pirouette. He approached, and his sleeve caught on the corner of a hovering holographic podium, sending the greeting scroll spinning like a paper airplane through the chamber. The Drelax envoy blinked, one limb twitching in what Ethan hoped was patience. The Queen's long ears twitched, a faint smirk crossing her lips. "Improvisation is acceptable," she said, "though elegant failure is preferable." Ethan bowed awkwardly and muttered, "I am trying my best." Next came the challenge of ritual gift exchange. Ethan had prepared a small earth trinket, a snow globe with a miniature rotating city inside. He stepped forward, tripped slightly over a floating cable, and the snow globe slipped from his hands, spinning wildly in the air before striking a hovering candle hologram. Sparks of light scattered across the chamber, eliciting a soft gasp from a nearby diplomat and a delicate, musical chuckle from the Queen. Ethan scrambled to catch the globe, spinning in a manner that would have impressed any circus troupe, and bowed. "Gift received, I hope?" he asked. The Queen's laughter rippled through the hall. "Yes, the gesture is appreciated. Accidents add flavor to ceremony." Ethan noted that apparently flavor was code for "well done, human, you didn't completely ruin it." The afternoon brought the etiquette debate. Ethan was to argue for Earth's position in a mock interstellar council, while simultaneously maintaining eye contact with dignitaries whose ears twitched like antennae detecting lies. He began cautiously, offering logical points about trade routes and planetary resources, only to realize that one of the dignitaries had silently projected holograms of exploding oranges in protest. Ethan blinked. "Ah, fruit diplomacy," he said, gesturing toward the holograms, and one of the dignitaries emitted a sound that might have been laughter. The Queen's ears flicked sharply and she said, "Observe, human. Humor often softens tension more than logic ever can." Ethan nodded, secretly thrilled that accidentally referencing fruit explosions was now considered a strategy. During a brief break, A small floating cube drifted toward him. It emitted soft musical notes, and when touched, rearranged itself into the shape of a tiny spaceship. Ethan poked it, and it zipped away, colliding gently with a hovering orb. He muttered, "I am beginning to understand. Everything has personality here." The Queen appeared beside him, ears twitching in amusement. "Indeed, in our courts, objects, food, and even holograms are participants. Interactions with them reveal character." Ethan grinned, realizing he had inadvertently been judged by pastries, fruit, and holographic snow globes all morning. The final exercise involved a crisis scenario. An alien diplomat had been offended by a misinterpreted gesture. Ethan was to restore goodwill using a combination of words, humor, and ceremonial gestures. He bowed, tripped slightly, and extended a floating tray of luminous fruit. One orb drifted away, orbiting the ambassador, who blinked slowly. Ethan cleared his throat. "I meant to offer respect and a fruit satellite." The Queen's melodic laughter filled the chamber. "Excellent. Acknowledgement of error and creative adaptation. This is the essence of diplomacy." Ethan felt his chest swell with a mix of relief and disbelief. Somehow, in the midst of floating snacks, holographic explosions, and his own clumsy gestures, he was actually succeeding. By evening, Ethan's exhaustion was profound, though a grin lingered on his face. The Queen approached, ears flicking in a rhythm that suggested approval. "You navigate error with courage and humor. Your species' charm lies not in perfection but in persistence," she said. Ethan bowed, thinking of the fruit, pastries, and tripping over cables, and realized he had survived another day in the Xyarian court with dignity, if one could call it dignity, and a growing understanding of how humor and sincerity outweighed flawless behavior. As he left the chamber, a small floating pastry trailed after him, blinking in a way that felt like applause. Ethan chuckled, muttering, "Not sure if I'm winning or just entertaining everyone," and the pastry floated along obediently, as if acknowledging that in this court, either was acceptable. Ethan stepped off the shuttle, this time with a sense of cautious confidence, though the slipperiness of zero-gravity walkways kept him on edge. Today was not just another day in the palace. It was the culmination of weeks of chaos, fruit diplomacy, floating pastries, and tripping over both holograms and protocol. The Queen had summoned him for a final mission, a diplomatic visit to the asteroid city of Zenthara, a hub of trade, intrigue, and a notoriously unforgiving sense of humor. Ethan swallowed and adjusted the strap of the holographic briefcase containing his gift, a floating orb from Earth that somehow survived the journey intact. He felt the familiar hum of the palace floor, a gentle reminder that his human legs could only do so much in a court where gravity obeyed whimsy. The Queen waited on her levitating throne, her long ears twitching in a rhythm that had become almost musical to Ethan. "Today," she said, voice calm but commanding, "we observe how you apply all lessons. Humor, courage, humility, and adaptation. You will encounter unpredictability, embrace it." Ethan nodded, remembering the snow globe, the orbiting fruit, and the snack rebellions. He had learned that disasters in the Xyarian court were opportunities in disguise. He took a deep breath, reminding himself that if he could survive past the ceremonial chocolate incident, he could survive anything. The shuttle entered Zenthara, weaving through floating market stalls and platforms that rotated gently in the zero-gravity orbit. Ethan's first task was a greeting ceremony with local dignitaries. He stepped forward and executed a bow that managed to avoid tripping, mostly. One dignitary's hoverdog barked at him, which he interpreted as either a threat or a compliment. He smiled, offered a small joke about Earth pets, and received a ripple of laughter. The Queen's ears flicked once, almost imperceptibly, and Ethan felt a thrill of accomplishment. Next came the gift exchange. Ethan held the floating orb between his hands, carefully, as he approached a hovering council. He remembered the snow globe incident and consciously resisted the urge to panic. One of the dignitaries extended a limb toward the orb, and Ethan released it slightly. The orb floated gracefully into the dignitary's grasp, and for the first time, Ethan felt the clean satisfaction of executing a gesture without catastrophe. The queen's silver eyes flicked at him, a glimmer of approval, and her ears twitched once, a private signal that he had done well. Then came the crisis scenario, a minor misunderstanding involving trade routes, floating cargo crates, and an over-enthusiastic market drone that had flung a glowing fruit into the wrong stall. Ethan sighed, prepared for disaster, but instead of panicking, he addressed the situation calmly, offering humor where tension flared. "It appears the fruit wishes to expand its influence," he joked, gesturing at the errant orb. The dignitaries laughed, the fruit was retrieved without incident, and the ambassador in question nodded, apparently mollified. Ethan realized, almost in disbelief, that he had finally internalized the queen's lesson. Sincerity, courage, and humor could navigate chaos better than strict adherence to rules. By mid-afternoon, Ethan was exhausted but exhilarated. The queen summoned him to a private chamber, her long ears flicking softly as she watched him approach. "You have learned well," she said. "You stumbled, you laughed, you adapted, and you grew. Today, you navigated chaos as if it were your ally rather than your enemy. That is the essence of trust in this court." Ethan blinked, words failing him for once. I never thought I'd survive," he said, voice quiet though tinged with wonder. The queen's smile deepened. "Survival is trivial. Growth, courage, and the willingness to be flawed, that is rare." As the shuttle prepared to return to the capital, Ethan reflected on his journey. He had arrived fumbling, terrified, and endlessly clumsy, but he was leaving with something far more valuable than perfect protocol: confidence in his own judgment, the ability to face mistakes with humor, and an understanding that even in alien courts, character mattered more than flawless performance. He glanced at the floating orb, now a symbol of both Earth ingenuity and the lessons of Zenthara. Somehow, between chocolate mishaps, tripping over floating cables, and accidental fruit diplomacy, he had earned a place of genuine respect in a world that once seemed impossible to navigate. As the stars streaked past the shuttle window, Ethan caught a final glimpse of the queen on her levitating throne, ears twitching in a rhythm that felt like applause. He grinned, realizing that she had taught him the ultimate lesson. Perfection was boring, chaos was inevitable, and courage paired with humor was the truest form of diplomacy. He leaned back in his seat, letting the hum of the ship carry him home, ready to tell stories of orbiting fruit, floating pastries, and the long-eared queen who had turned his disasters into triumphs. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling a deep, satisfying sense of completion. He had crossed lines, survived missteps, and emerged transformed, with both the memory of chaos and the pride of mastery. Somewhere in the galaxy, a small glowing orb winked at him, and he winked back. This was not the end of his journey. It was the moment he realized he could handle any absurdity the universe sent his way. And that, he thought with a grin, was a victory worth every stumble.